Mediated Conversation on SAFM.
28 minutes now to 9 the time for your Mediated Conversation this morning. After the COVID-19 pandemic, the most important question that we face as a country is whether we can get young people into work. You'll know how many young people are not working and are not in educational training at the moment. While the numbers can vary, it seems certain that there are at least 9 million young people who are not working or studying at the moment, and the prospects for them to get into sustainable jobs in the future are very slim. This affects us in all sorts of ways. It leads to frustration and anger and poverty and inequality, and that's just the beginning. So then, what options are there to try and improve the situation? This is the subject of a Mediated Conversation this morning. First, you'll hear from the head of the Centre for Development and Enterprise, Bernstein. They've released a new report with several recommendations on how to improve the situation. Then you'll hear from Professor Willie Chinyamurindi, head of business management at Hare University. He's also studied the issue of youth unemployment. Rob Urquhart is the head of research at the Harambe Youth Accelerator. They try and get young people into jobs. We start then with Bernstein. Anne, good morning and thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning. Hi, Stephen.
We know the scale of the problem, but there are also important features within it. For example, it seems that there are more young women who are unemployed than men, partly because of childcare issues. The real problem is it seems to be very, very difficult for people who are young, who are unemployed now, to get any kind of sustainable job.
Absolutely. And I think that, you would think that what happened in July, where whatever the implications of the attempted insurrection, which are still unclear, the opportunistic looting that we saw clearly reflected young people's rising frustrations, desperation, and disregard for the law. One would think that following that there would be a bold and urgent response to this catastrophic situation where nearly half the young people who are aged 15 to 34 are not in education, training, or employment. But we haven't seen that.
I mean, the real problem appears to be that younger people have not received a useful education. I'll use the phrase actually betrayed by our education system. So they don't have skills that businesses want. How big is that gap between what businesses want and what young people can actually offer?
I think you have to start in a different place, Stephen. I think you have to start with, unless you have a growing economy, South Africa can never turn this catastrophic situation around. So the first thing is the economy hasn't really grown, even pre-COVID, for at least 5, 6, 7 years. That's the first thing. So we have to do everything possible to persuade, to create a new environment, and that requires policy reform. The second thing is that we can't just go for growth. We have to go for labor-intensive growth. We have to get the incentives right that employers are prepared to risk hiring young people who've come out of a bad education, who've got no work experience, and probably come from families and communities where nobody works. The price of labor is too high, and all the rules and regulations make employers reluctant to take a risk on young people. And then thirdly, surely it's time that we actually made the changes to improve both the basic education system and our skills training system post-school, where the TVETs are expensive and they have incredibly low throughput of students. And their links to business, to firms, are generally very weak.
So, I mean, what you say in your report, as I understand it, is the CETA system doesn't really work. That's where business is supposed to sort of pay for the training of people. That doesn't work. The TVET system doesn't work. You suggest there should be more business involvement in the training of young people. How would that work? What are you recommending?
Well, there are a number of, we looked at the international experience. We looked at a lot of projects in Bushbuck Ridge and Alexandra Township as 2 case studies. And there are lots of places where young people are getting, youth centers where you get some skills, but generally they're very internally focused to the township rather than how to get jobs in, say, Sandton, where there are lots more opportunities than in the township. So a lot of the initiatives we have are too small and they're not really focused on getting the right skills for work. The TVETs are also, this is starting to change, but not at the rate that it should be, the TVETs are a big problem, and we need to rethink this. And it has to be done in association with business. So the success stories in other countries are where vocational education and training is linked to the needs of firms and what firms anticipate for the future. And that we've got to get that relationship much better. Now, the CETAs are for people who already have a job, but the point is that business is paying a lot of money for a system that almost everyone agrees, from unions to business to many government people, doesn't work. So business isn't going to put up more money when they're paying for something that is a failure. So we have to rethink this entire area. Can we do shorter courses? What will business need today and in the future? But unless, I learned something a long time ago from the head of education in Ghana. You can push young people to work hard and to make sacrifices to get various skills, but unless there are jobs for those people, this is a terribly frustrating experience, and we should beware dashed expectations in our particular situation. So you've got to get these three things, these three buckets of reform going in the right sequence. Otherwise, we're going to be in big trouble, more trouble than we are today.
You said a little while ago, and you do say it in your report, it should be easier and cheaper to employ young people. Now, this is very contentious. I mean, unions will go for you, other organizations will go for you. Why do you believe that?
Look, South Africans, we're paralyzed. On the one hand, there are unions and other interests in the ruling party who don't want to move on the labor laws. On the other hand, there are people, both within the Treasury and in other parts of government, who are saying we have to move here. And business is also starting to say we have to move on the labor laws if we're going to be a more labor-intensive economy. And, we can't all just stay exactly where we are. We have to try some new things. We have to take some risks. And we have put forward carefully calibrated reforms to the labor laws, not wholesale reforms, not taking away the rights that unions have struggled for so long, but we're saying we have to change some things in order to enable smaller businesses to start up and new firms to start up, and to incentivize employers to hire young, inexperienced workers. We are proposing a reform zone, a special zone, to test out whether South Africa can attract low-skill manufacturing in the Urquhart zone. And that's an experiment. Let's try it. If it works, I think there would be a lot more support for this kind of an initiative. If it doesn't, well, we were wrong, and hopefully other people will put some practical ideas on the table. But to just keep talking about this phenomenon and not taking the policy decisions we need is what's causing South Africa to be probably the country with the highest youth unemployment in the world.
And Bernstein, thank you. Head of the Centre for Development and Enterprise. I do appreciate the time. Their report released there yesterday, as it happens. You were there, SAFM. Your mediated conversation continues 9 minutes to 9 around youth unemployment. Professor Willie Chinyamurindi is the Head of Business Management at Hare University. He studied the issue of youth unemployment. Professor, good morning, and thank you for your time.
Good morning, Stephen. Always great to be on your show.
I'm going to come to the other recommendations of the Centre in a moment, and I know that you've seen the report. But first, the idea of making it easier for companies to hire younger people. So easier and cheaper. And what I think this really means is for companies to be able to fire younger people if it doesn't work out as well. And I think that's the sort of, part of this as well. Do you believe that would make a difference? Is that part of the problem? And I realize, Professor, it's a very political issue, this.
Absolutely, Stephen. And I also cringed a bit making it easier because my connotation there was trying to also safeguard the other extreme of exploitation. You don't want young people to be exploited. And I believe that the current system of internship is really a form of that exploitation that happens in the form of, in the argument of giving young people skills. However, what we when I read the report, what I do welcome is the collective idea of bringing varying stakeholders to the table. The first important stakeholder is obviously and the direction of this expanded economy is policy certainty around addressing some of the challenges that these young people are facing. And this policy direction is needed, and it will probably be the most deliberate and intentional effort to set the scene or the tone for businesses to be interested in employing young people. And most businesses right now would have to be struggling with issues of the pandemic, cutting down, the uncertainty of moving between the different levels, and it means closure, limited hours of operation. If the government can create a position of certainty around the nature of the challenge related to these young people, I think this would also then allow for other things that the report talks about, incentivizing young people. Also looking at the idea of making sure that the work that is being, or the skills being given to these young people are skills that are relevant and not just photocopying and being asked at a government department to just run down the street and buy a cool drink for the people in the office. And we're talking about real hard skills that these young people would need.
The real issue, I suppose, is education. So essentially, I'm no expert in this, but it would seem to me that one of the big problems is that young people almost need a second education. I don't mean, another 12 years. What I do mean is some kind of skilling or reskilling, or whatever we want to call it. How should we do that as a society? We're talking about trying to educate or re-educate people, say, between 18 and 25.
I think there's room, Stephen, in the current system to change a few things. For instance, I have a third-year cohort of students. I'm teaching a module on strategic management and entrepreneurship development and so forth. It would be injurious for me as a lecturer to be pumping these students with so much theory around how the etiquette around starting small businesses, when I should actually be exposing them to the real world life scenario of saying, okay, so here's the assignment. Go and interview somebody who is running a small business. What do you learn from that? And finding ways of changing the current system. I think what we need really is an overhaul of what we are currently doing to try and incorporate some of the aspects that this report talks about, which is the aspects of more practical, real-life scenarios to the current education system. It's not enough to just pump our students with all the theories, and we need some form of an intervention where we also put ourselves as lecturers and educators to school on what are we doing right and what are we not doing right in terms of addressing this challenge before us.
What it also tells us is that this is going to require a massive social effort. I don't know if we see the social effort. We lament this, and Anne Bernstein, I think we'd have to agree that government needs to do something, and yet nothing's happened in this for quite a long time, despite the fact that it's obvious the problem is getting worse.
And the events in the two areas, Gauteng and KZN, really then point to us that we must be doing something quickly, because the challenge is huge, Stephen. And the report talks about the angle of rurality. I work in a predominantly rural setup. I know very well when students write to us about lack of opportunities, local economic development opportunities in the areas that they are in. Maybe to just be cautious here, we don't need another uprising, as the report states, in KZN or any part of the country to remind us of the scale of the challenge we have before us.
In the middle of this is our local elections, and I know that you've been looking at the manifestos of political parties, and political parties talk about this to a large extent. Do you believe they have solutions to the problem? Are they offering options?
So when I was reading the manifesto of the different political parties, the top three parties, if you like, you could see similarity in some of the aspects that the report talks about. I mean, the report talks about the critique of the expanded work program. In the scenario, the report is advocating for the expanded works program to take more, efficacy around that. And yet, when I read the DA manifesto, the DA was scathing about the impact of such intervention, such as the expanded works program. So the different political parties even have approached it from different angles. EFF coming to point out the areas of advocacy and lobbying that they have done, putting to check some of the major political parties who are ruling in these metros, but not much tangible real-life scenario that that young person in Ekurhuleni has benefited from a project on skills development that has been run by this political party. So there's a lot of diagnosis of the problem, Stephen, and the fine line between the solutions. It's stuff we've heard before. Whether it will work or not, it really leaves me a bit cautious, really.
Well, I mean, this comes to the other problem we have. I mean, many people call it an insiders and outsiders problem. If you're inside employment, yes, you're okay. If you're outside, you're almost never going to get in. So the problem with that is that the people who are in employment, the interests are very entrenched, and so it's quite difficult to get them to remove those interests or to break down, to get past those entrenched interests. What I think I'm trying to say is there something within the very nature of our society, maybe it's the inequality or something, that is preventing us from actually finding a way to solve this? I mean, we can blame leadership all we like, but leadership also responds to constituencies.
Leadership also sets the tone sometimes, and that responsiveness that you're talking about. I think, yes, the fabric really is wearing and tearing, particularly on the social side. I mean, we're in an equal society. We're in an equal country where there are these huge disparities between the haves and the have-nots, and really these have and have-nots, this divide that we have really nearly finds its platform of play, particularly in this skills unemployment challenge that we're talking about, Stephen.
Professor Willie Chinyamurindi, thank you very much indeed. Head of Business Management at Fort Hare University, an economist, of course. In a moment, we'll speak to Rob Urquhart, the Head of Research at Harambe, or an organisation that tries to get young people into work. You with SAFM, your Mediated Conversation will continue 10 minutes to 9.
Mediated Conversation on SAFM.
Continuing your Mediated Conversation at 8 minutes to 9 around getting young people into work. Rob Urquhart is the Head of Research at the Harambe Youth Accelerator. Rob, good morning.
Good morning, Stephen, and good morning to everyone listening.
You work with young people. What kind of training, opportunities or linkages actually work? What does make a difference?
So certainly in our experience, and I was very glad to see the CDE report call this out, is that I think first of all is this idea of demand-led training that really is structured and in the interest of what is required in the job. And Anne's report, I think, points out quite usefully how historically our education system, our post-schooling education system, has invested billions and billions and billions into throwing money at skills development, but at skills that aren't necessarily tied to what the jobs are required. So when we have demand-led training, we know for a fact that that works and is very practical. I think we also know that demand-led training doesn't have to be, to your earlier point, Stephen, it doesn't have to be year-long or 2 years long. It can be as short as 3 to 5 weeks. And when we talk about demand-led training, I think the important thing to also note is it's not just about the hard skills that you need for work, but time and time again over the last 10 years, employers have told us that it's the soft skills that matter the most, as those hard skills. And as Standard Bank had said to us, give me someone with the will, and I'll train them for the skill. And so I think some of the challenges when we talk about getting young people into jobs and lowering that friction for employers hiring first-time work seekers is is as much about their skills as it was as much about their soft skills, their the behaviors that they need for work, as it is about their hard skills.
I mean, in a way, there's a sort of middle-class bias to work, right? I mean, if we take an office, for example, you need to know how to answer a phone. If you've never been in an office until the age of 18 or 19 because your parents didn't work in an office, well, then you're not going to know how to answer a phone. And that's actually a major problem. It's a major part of the skill.
Exactly. That's exactly right. For you coming from households where there hasn't been an experience of work, or certainly if there hasn't been an experience of even white-collar work, then that is a challenge. But I mean, I in some ways I also think that's it's perhaps characteristic of there's some of that is perhaps characteristic of youth worldwide. If you haven't worked before, the discipline of getting up to be at a shift that starts at 8 a.m. or 9 a.m., standing on your feet all day, what customer service looks like, are foreign concepts, and so this the age-old problem of work experience becomes an issue, because it's through work experience that you not only gain those hard skills, but you gain those practical those practical skills as well.
A person who gets the training you spoke, 5 to 8 weeks, say, are they able to find a job on a sustainable basis, or do they find they work for just a couple of months?
I think that's a really good question, and I was reflecting on the CDE report yesterday, and I think the one thing that has stood out for me is just what the nature of, what we are missing, I think, a little bit is what the nature of work in South Africa and the world is starting to look like, and it's not just South Africa. So yes, I think what a 5 to 8 week training program can do is get you into a 10 to 12 month opportunity, and with a very good chance of conversion into sort of more permanent work, about 75 to 80% chance of conversion. But I say that because the challenge is, when we look at the labor market over the last, certainly over the last 5 years, this idea of permanent work is a unicorn. It's the idea of jobs that you go to that is a permanent contract. They're very few and far between, and certainly at the entry level, they're golden opportunities. And instead, what we've started to see is this increasing prevalence of short-term work and shorter experiences of work, of contracts that may be 3 to 5 months, that may get renewed, of 10 to 12 months learnerships. Certainly this learnership concept has come to dominate the conversation in South Africa. But we have this experience of a labor market where there is a lot of hopscotching between jobs because they are so short in opportunity. And I think the challenge and the requirement is yes, we can grow jobs, and we absolutely need to grow jobs, as the CDE points out. It's like it should be plan A, plan B, and plan C. But in as much as we do that, we also need to do that in recognition of a labor market that's structured the way it is, with these short-term work experiences and pieces of work. And so what's needed is, how do you help young people move from one to the other, and ultimately actually build a pathway to employment that is meaningful, in which one opportunity does provide a stepping stone to the next opportunity, to the next.
I mean, in a way, providing a career. You go from one job to the next, and they hopefully get better. They go better over time. Is there a political problem here, Rob? I mean, in your view, I asked the same question to the professor a moment ago. I mean, is there a political problem where no one wants to make a change to what we have now, or for some reason that change seems impossible? The decision to make the change doesn't seem possible.
I think it will be a political problem for anyone who is leading the country. I think it's a political problem in the sense that there's some hard choices, and there's some hard decisions that need to be made on the one hand. On the other, I think there's some deeply systemic issues. So take, for example, how skilling has been funded in the past, which is very much on inputs rather than outputs. And how do you change how do you change the structure of Treasury or the structure of financing skilling programs to be more outcomes driven? We've had a look at that over the last year, and it's really, really difficult. It's like turning a battleship around. And so I think that it will be a problem for any political party as much, but having said that, I think it's as much deeply rooted into the structures of government.
Rob Urquhart, thanks very much indeed. Head of Research at the Harambe Youth Accelerator, bringing an end to your Mediated Conversation today. My thanks to Professor Willie Chinyamurindi, Professor, Head of Business Management at the University of Hare, starting us off today, the Head of the Centre for Development and Enterprise, and Bernstein. Well, plenty coming your way here on SAFM. Kathy, of course, is next from Zoma, Sanza, Imdu, myself. Look after yourself. And Joey, sorry, nearly forgot you. We'll, of course, will be back tomorrow. Take care. You with SAFM leading the conversation, 9 o'clock.